Christian, welcome to the Exodus podcast. How's it going?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me, Jake. I've been wanting to get on the podcast for a while, so finally got the invite. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to have you on here. Been following what you guys have been doing here for a couple of years now, and it's been really cool to see your guys' success on out in the wild and also on the web. And it's been really cool, and I'm excited to talk about a lot of things here today. But before we get into that, go ahead and introduce yourself and anything else people should know about you.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Christian Babcock. I currently live in Central Texas. So I live in Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin now. I lived about 21, 22 years in Oklahoma before this. So I'm not a Texan by trade. I'm an import, some people might say. I run Hunter's Advantage along with a couple other buddies, which really I think some of the motivation for starting that was having very limited knowledge on whitetail and hunting in different environments. And because I had a couple hunting mentors growing up, my uncle and my dad, and they were very, very good at hunting the same stands every single year in Northeast Oklahoma. And out of a selfish desire to get better, understanding multiple species and then how to hunt in different environments based on different factors and stuff that's going on, I wanted to talk to people that understood more about hunting than I did. So I started it when I was 19, and it's been about 4 or 5 years now, and have learned a ton from people all over the country. But that's kind of a little bit about me and a little bit about Hunter's Advantage.
That's cool. Okay, so Hunter's Advantage. How'd you guys come up with that name?
Dude, I was thinking about that. I was in Colorado skiing with my wife's family, and just like most folks, we had always filmed and kind of had a little hunting group. Everybody like take their prerequisite name and then add outdoors to the end of it. We had done that 2 or 3 times, and I was finally in 2019. I was like, I want to take this seriously, and then I was thinking about it, like I was thinking about hunting and names, and I didn't want to be another outdoors kind of thing. And I was like, well, animals have all the advantage in the wild, right? They have camouflage. They have all these great senses. They live in their environment. We're coming into their environment trying to kill them. We need to, like, Hunter's Advantage makes sense. Like, what can we do to stack the deck in our favor? Because honestly, the animals have all of the favor when it comes to us hunting them. So that's kind of how I thought about the name, was like, how can we give hunters an advantage versus the game that we chase? Because Lord knows they're hard enough to kill. We need to stack the deck as much as we can.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really cool to hear that you started the project basically on the yearning desire to learn more. And do you think that has directly impacted your success during fall?
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, we have this constant feeling of just curiosity. Like, anyone that has more knowledge about a certain subject than I'm interested in, I would love to talk to them, which has helped a ton with the podcast, and just staying curious has helped us a ton, because when I go to different environments or I plan a hunt somewhere, I'm like, I want to talk to someone that has that knowledge and experience, and kind of shorten the learning curve for me. So that just natural curiosity has helped me a ton. I mean, I do want to complete the North American Big Game Super Slam with a bow. I really have a desire to do that. So there's like an endless pool of subjects to dive into, and an endless pool of people to talk to. So it's been awesome to just learn things about different species and different places to hunt whitetail and environments and all that stuff over the last 5 years. And I feel like that's been a key part of the success, is just staying curious and just always having those conversations with folks that know a lot more about this stuff than I do.
Yeah, I've always been so surprised and thankful of how willing people are to share information that's taken them decades and decades to develop, and then for them to open the playbook. I mean, it's up to you to execute it, but regardless, to your point, flatten the learning curve. I just talked about that in this week's episode with Byron, of how thankful I think everyone really should be. I think we take it for granted of how easy it is to get really strong information from all parts of the country for all different endeavors. And that's really cool. So how'd you want to land on that goal? I mean, that's a pretty lofty goal. There's not too many people I talk to that want to do the North American Super Slam with a bow.
I mean, in the wise words of Ted Nugent, the mystical flight of the arrow has entranced me. I mean, I just love watching.
You are a Texan now.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's anything more beautiful, besides my wife maybe, than running a arrow through both lungs of a big game animal. And, I have some that are higher up on the list than others, but I just think it's just a beautiful sight. I love doing it. There's nothing that gets me more excited in the world. And I'm like, man, I think about all the environments and all these places that I want to travel to. Most people want to travel just to enjoy and sightsee and do all those things. I want to travel and see everything through the lens of a bow and arrow. I think that's what excites me. Like when my wife's like, "Oh, let's go to Europe," I'm like, "What can you hunt in Europe?" Like that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And so, what's maybe the top two big game species for that slam that have you most excited? Obviously, you've knocked out whitetail, but beyond
Yeah,
that,
yeah. I shot antelope, but not with a bow, so I'm not going to count that one. Um, I think any of the sheep, Dall sheep,
mm,
desert bighorn. I mean, maybe it's some of the limitedness to the tags that makes it so entrancing. Like it's one of those things you can't just wake up and be like, "Let's go try."
yeah,
So that's definitely one of them. I'm going to May. I'm going to Canada in May to hunt black bear. So hopefully we'll knock that one off. I think probably a moose would be another one. One of those staple pieces that goes above the fireplace. Like those, I think a moose would be incredible. Anything that goes in one of these crazy extreme environments that like you can literally hurt yourself going to chase. Those ones definitely. Those ones light the fire.
And so, do you have a point strategy for some of those sheep hunts?
No, I've sat down and I've started thinking about that. That's I've looked at some of the like there's Go there. I don't know if Go Hunt does it. There's Hunt and Fool. There's a few of those companies that help you organize your points and stuff. And I've sat down like this spring and I was looking through a bunch of that stuff. I was like, okay, you're 26 years old. You're probably not going to draw a lot of these tags for over a decade, right?
Or
And
longer, yeah.
or
Those sheep
longer,
hunts.
and in the sheep, right? So I've really started taking that fairly seriously this year in figuring out what it's going to take and kind of getting organized. Because, like you said, a lot of this stuff is just planning, right? Getting the points and then getting hooked up with the right people to make it happen. So
Mhm.
I've taken that a lot more seriously. I think I fell into the thing of like, oh, you're young, you have time, and I'm like, oh, I actually don't. I could be 50 before I go on a lot of these hunts, right?
Which is insane. How long it takes to hunt some of those coveted tags. So I've used the draw. That's who I've been using, and
Hmm.
then WTA does it as well. And I think the importance of working with someone that just out of sight, out of mind. Because in your similar situation, there was a couple years ago I missed where I was like, I'm going to do it, and then next thing I know, it's like, oh, you missed the deadline, and then it's you just miss a whole year, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
like it sounds silly to have someone manage that or help you keep organized with it, but I have found that to be very useful for myself personally.
yeah, for sure.
And so this is pretty fun because your uncle was a guest on Whitetail Cribs in 21, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So Chad and Cameron went out to Oklahoma. I think they recorded, I don't know, 5 or 6 cribs, and your uncle had the whitetail ambulance, which is the
Oh yeah,
one of the most unique pieces of whitetail cribs out of all the ones we've done. So just explain that a little bit so people can get an idea what that entailed.
yeah. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but my uncle has definitely been one of my hunting mentors. Probably one of the bigger ones, and one that's really got me into hunting on public land, especially. And he's very much one of those like DIY guys. Like if you can see it, he can build it. Like I swear, I roomed with a lot of engineers in college, and there's like book knowledge and then there's like actual applied knowledge. My uncle is an engineer without a degree. Like he can sketch anything out, and if you can imagine it, he could build it,
That's
right?
cool.
And so he took a there was a ambulance that was for sale. I think the fire department had it, and he was like, you know what? I'm gonna buy the back half of it, and then someone else can have the cab in the front. So he sold the cab and the engine to another guy, and was like, "That's gonna be my public land rig." So he like took it, had all the storage. Like if you ever talk to him, he loves to talk about all the storage in the ambulance. And he cut it off, like basically welded a tongue and then like a bed on the front where he could like put his four wheeler up on it, and he sleeps in that thing everywhere he goes on public land. So it's a really awesome rig. He's outfitted it like he put cots in there and all that sort of stuff. And he loves to show it off to people. He's recently painted it since you guys saw it last.
Okay.
And yeah, he calls it the meat wagon, which I think is hilarious. That's just a funny that is a funny thing to call your hunting rig. He's not one of the people that's going to go buy a new camper or anything. So the meat wagon has made many treks to public land in Oklahoma and had some pretty good success out of it.
That's cool. Has he always hunted public land, or have you maybe inspired him a little bit to venture out?
No, he's definitely inspired me. So he had always hunted the mountains in Oklahoma quite a bit, in the eastern part of the state, and had some pretty good success, rifle hunting and muzzleloader hunting. There's a lot of those places you can do that on, but when he really got serious about public land hunting was like in 2010. He went up to Kansas, and obviously it's a completely different game in Kansas in 2023 than it was in 2010. But he shot like 152-inch 10 on public land in Kansas, and the deer is like 24 inches wide, and it has like
Wow.
1 inch eye guards. So you got to realize that's 150-inch 8 basically minus
Mhm.
2 inches. So that deer was 153 and like netted 151. I think that was his second Pope and Young, but every big deer he's killed has been on public land. He killed one in Oklahoma this year that was 165.
I seen
And
that.
so,
That was
yeah,
awesome.
incredible buck. I mean, so yeah, he's been doing it for a long time. And originally what we did was like we would just piggyback off him. So anywhere he would go, we would go and just try to establish our own spot. But there was a period of time for about 3 or 4 years where the only places I would hunt would be places that he recycled, like places he's like, I'm not hunting there anymore. I'm like, well, I don't know, crap. I couldn't tell you any type of tree tracks. I suck at hunting. This is a long time ago, but I would just use his old pins, and it worked for me for a long time. And he's not that nice anymore. He won't let us take all his spots anymore. But when you're 18 or 16 years old, he would. So
That's that's
yeah.
awesome. And so it seemed like some of this birth of public land was birthed a little bit out of necessity. It sounded like you lost some access to private, and it was kind of one way to illustrate it is pushed out of the nest. Like, are you going to fly or are you going to fall flat on your face? And I would say you guys have been
Yep.
flying. So, how, I mean, at the time, what was your expectations? Because obviously, you guys, it's all correlated to the amount of work and information that you try to consume in order to be more effective. So, I'm giving you credit for that. But beyond that, how was that process? Was it intimidating? Were you nervous? Or you're like, I'm just gonna figure it out and it's a matter of time?
Yeah, like I definitely nervous, but like you said, born out of necessity. So we went all through college being able to hunt private land, right? Like my uncle had several, not Justin, a different uncle had several decent places that I'd shot several bucks off with my bow. He ended up selling that place. It was gone. Jake ended up losing permission to a place, one of his grandparents' places. And I'm trying to think what else happened. Yeah, basically a bunch of that happens. Land changes hands, people lose permission to stuff sells. It just naturally it happens, right? And so on the 2020 season, so it'd be the summer of 2020, we sat down and I was like, okay, I don't have a single piece of private land that I can hunt, like in the entire state. And I grew up in Oklahoma my entire life. And so to have basically nowhere to hunt, I was like, this really sucks. Like but it just happens naturally, right? And it was a similar story to Jake. And we were like, listen, we had experiences on public land from 2016 to 2019, but very not out of necessity, right? Like not an obsessive take on public land. Basically, just hey, when we have a weekend where we think it's going to suck back at home, we're going to go check out public land. And for the amount of effort that we put in, we kind of had a rabbit's foot because in 2017 there was a weekend where every one of us shot a buck on public land. Now we all sucked at hunting, so none of us found those deer. One of the deer that I shot though was a about 140-inch 8. I know people hear that, right? 140-inch 8 BS, right? No, I know what 140-inch 8 looks like. So basically, this buck had came in. I watched him all morning coming off the top of a ridge down into this oak flat, and I had just bought a brand new bow from Academy, one of the piece of crap ready to hunt rigs for like $300-400. And this buck, when I got in a full draw, my pin was just shaking all over him. And I'd never seen a buck bigger than like 110 inches in my whole life. So to see 140, that might as well have been a 200. And so I pulled back and I shot and I jerked the shot terribly. It went right in front of the deer's brisket, or it would have, but the deer had its head down when I shot. So what happened was that bow was slow, right? So when I shot, he threw his head up to look at me, and it was right in front of his brisket. It hit square in the forehead, and that deer ran off. Not even a half inch of penetration with a fixed blade broadhead. It looked like somebody had hit him with a Louisville Slugger in the head, just knocked him backwards. He ran off, broke the knock off, and never found that deer. That made me sick. But I knew, based on a few of the experiences we had, me shooting a buck, Jake shooting one, our buddy Jared shooting one, not finding any of them. Hey, public land is there for the taking. It was just kind of us, right? Our lack of skills is kind of what's bottlenecking us on public land. It's not access. It's not finding deer. It's not hunting hard. It's just we need to be better as archers, as bow hunters, and so that progression, from 2017 to 2020, we got a heck of a lot better at hunting on public land, and we had a heck of a lot of success in 2020. Jake shot a 162-inch buck on public. I shot a 131-inch 8, but going into that, we were super nervous and ended up having a lot of success though after getting forced out of the nest of private land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of probably at the time it was frustrating, but now it's maybe one of the better things that's happened in reality.
It definitely is, because I think about that now. It's, if you're not learning, you're not getting better, right? But we were never put in situations where we had to learn at all, right? It's like, go to that stand we've had over there for a decade, sit over this corn pile or sit in this field, where they're going to use this. We never had to know anything about hunting. We were just going out and sitting in places that everybody had sit in forever. And eventually, we would shoot a deer doing that. But I had no idea how to read sign. I had no idea how to pick a stand based on wind location or terrain features or anything like that. So going out on public land was definitely like getting kicked out of the nest. But I promise you, I've shot bigger deer since then. That 8 that I have on public land is my favorite buck I've ever shot, because average Joe could have walked up under that tree and shot that same deer. So it just means a heck of a lot more when you have to work for it like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so last year you had a really great successful year as well. Tagged buck opening day. I think opening day is interesting because you have some people that are really successful that will only hunt opening day if the conditions are correct. And obviously that's different throughout the country and different on, what people's goals are and everything else. But regardless, you shot a really solid deer opening day. Break that down, start to finish on when did you decide you were going to hunt that particular spot opening day? What made you hunt there? And, the moment of truth as well.
Yeah. Well, the story starts a little bit earlier than 2022 opening day. In the fall of 2021, I picked up a lease. It's like a 110-acre lease. And when I say this place is 95% bedding, it is 95% bedding. I mean, it's very hard to get into because the deer bed everywhere. It's like 10-foot tall Johnson grass along a river bottom. And so it just gets really tall. It gets really funky. But there was a heck of a lot of deer in there. So I went in there the last season, hung trail cameras, and I got a ton of bucks. Like when I say I had 10 to 15 bucks and probably 7 or 8 of them were shooters, that's not an exaggeration. And, summer picks only tell part of the story, but one of the bucks that was really consistent on those cameras was a 6x7. And, really to describe the buck for people that are just listening, he's really narrow, probably 13 and a half inches wide, but really heavy and really short tined. When people think of a buck that has like a fighting rack, that is one of the bucks, right? Like he can get inside another deer and really just mess him up. And is exactly what happened. So I shot a really funky 8-pointer, has like a right angle on one of the sides.
It's on like your hat, right?
Yeah. This hat right here. Yeah. The funky buck. I shot that deer on October 17th in 2021. And one of the stipulations of this property was like, hey, all the people that hunt around me are very management minded, and so am I. And so they want to shoot for age. Well, that funky buck that I shot was a 7.5-year-old deer. And you only get one deer on this property. So me being the way I grew up, I'm not going to pass a 7.5-year-old deer. I don't care if it's 12 inches. I can't pass a mature deer. It's just against my ethos. So I shot that buck, but I still kept my cameras out, right? And man, when we were hunting public land in Oklahoma that fall or that November, my cameras were just lighting up like it was torture. This 6x7 was there every day. He had a broken up rack on one side, like he was missing an eye guard, but he was the big dog in that area. And he was pushing all the other bucks off, but I was getting a ton of really good pictures of him in early November. But thankfully my camera died and it didn't have to torture me any longer. And I just left it out there. Right. So fast forward to May of 2022. So a few months later, the first buck that I get on camera is the 6x7. And you can tell it's him because he has these almost like he has a split eye guard on one side, and you can just tell by the mask coming out of those bases that it's the same deer. And I was like, awesome. So I watched that buck all summer. I'd never seen him in person hunting in 2021. Granted, I only hunted him there a few times, but he was one of the big dogs in the area, and I never saw him. So what happened was I watched him all summer. There was a couple good bucks in there that I would have shot. Peyton ended up shooting one of them, but that buck, he was just there. You know how it happens before the season. It's like 2 weeks before the season. You don't even really want to check your cameras because they're in there. If they're in there every evening and morning during daylight, you're like, well, something's going to change. I don't even want to get my hopes up. So, but it didn't. It didn't change. And so the day before season, I'm driving up. I remember it. I'm driving up and I look at my camera right up before dark, and he's still there. I'm like, oh my gosh, one more time. You start counting down the days during the week. It's like, all right, 6 more times, 5 more times, 4. One more time, he did it. So I slipped in there super early, probably an hour before I would normally slip in, and did not use a flashlight, didn't step on any leaf out of way. And I slipped up in the stand, and it never works this way. I've never shot a buck opening day. I think the earliest buck I'd ever shot was 2 weeks later than that. So I slipped up in the stand that morning, and I was like, I feel like it's gonna happen. And as I sit down, I get all my camera gear set up, and like the first deer that I saw was like a spike that morning, and I see a spike, and I'm like, awesome, like because a spike was one of those deer that he was running with, right? And a spike comes walking by, and I'm like picking my binos up to almost look at the spike, and I just see 13 points come away. I was like, oh my gosh. So I grabbed my bow off the hook, and God, it felt like hours watching him walk in, but eventually he gets to 25 yards. He's quartering away quite a bit, and I let one go on him. I pulled through the shot, and it's probably 6 inches further forward than I was aiming, and hit him right behind the shoulder. But like you guys can see in the video, probably 2 to 3 inches of penetration initially, and it was just terrible. Like the hair was just hanging out that one side. He runs out, and I've never had a deer do this before, but he runs out and stops at like 25 yards, which basically tells me that the shot sucked, because a deer that's hit hard isn't going to run to 25 yards and stop. Well, he stops. I load another arrow. He's probably quartering away as hard as you would ever feel comfortable shooting at a deer. I shoot him again, and as he's running off, you just see 2 arrows hanging out both sides. Well, long story short, we get a blood tracking dog. 6 hours later, go in, and the deer made it about 295 yards ish. And man, I was just in a trance when I saw this deer's body. Like he was 230 on the hoof, not gutted, but he was like a low rider. He was a super big body deer, but he wasn't very tall. And 7.5-year-old buck. When I took him to my taxidermist, one of the crazy things about him was he measured his neck, and he was like, hey, do you know how big a neck this deer had? And I was like, I don't. I haven't shot many deer with big necks. How big is it? And he said, it's like 23.5 inches. Whoa. And I was like, is that big? And he said, if it was another half inch, it would start going to elk forms on how big the neck was. I was like, what? He said it was the biggest Oklahoma neck he had that year, which there's some big body deer that get killed. So that was just pretty impressive. 7.5-year-old buck. It was so cool because I had sat there and watched that buck on trail camera dozens of hours and just looked at hundreds of pictures of him, and dude went to sleep dreaming about him some nights. And to kill him on opening day, it was kind of melodramatic, right? Because I was like, I wanted this long chase. I say that
the
now,
saga.
Yeah. It was not that. It was like the first time I saw him, I shot him and I got him. But I spent probably 18 months looking at pictures of him, so it made it sweet either way.
So tell us about the setup because I know we talked to a lot of people. Hunting mornings in October is kind of taboo. So why did you set up where you were, and just break down your thought process of why you were where you're at?
Sure. Yeah. This property has a really big oxbow in it, and there's a lot of bedding in on that oxbow. And where we set up there's one singular like ridge or creek system. It's a dry creek, like a wet weather creek. If it rains, it'll have some water in it, but usually not. And they kind of use that as a natural corridor coming straight down the middle of the property. So they use that from bedding, and there's winter wheat or beans usually up about a half a mile away that they can access. And so they'll use that system to get to it. Well, I had set up there, which is one of the legacy stands that was on the place, but the place hadn't been hunted for 2 or 3 years before we got on it. And which makes a lot of sense because the grass is not going to be 10 foot tall where most people manicure and going to hunt. But it actually ended up being a good thing. And I live probably 6 hours away from the property. So during that entire summer, I had only spent an hour and a half out there putting feed out. That was the only thing that I had done on the place. So there was no intrusion. There was nobody walking around. This property's a mile off the road, off an old country road. So not even like a highway, an old
Mhm.
road. And so there's legitimately no intrusion by people except for people feeding cattle. And it's so crazy because I had never hunted a place that didn't have intrusion or pressure. So when you add those factors together, a ton of bedding, no intrusion, nobody messing with them, mature deer move in daylight when they're not messed with. Like they just do. And this buck is a great example of that. I shot a 7.5-year-old buck the year before on October 17th. And then October 1st, the next year, I shoot a 7.5-year-old buck. And by the way, Peyton also shot a 6.5-year-old buck on that same place in that same tree stand a
Mm.
week later. So we got a 6.5, a 7, and a
That's
7
incredible.
at a one tree stand on a single property in a 2-year period of time. So when people say that deer don't move in October, they do. They do when they're not messed with, and
Yeah.
and that's I have to agree with that. Like deer do.
Yeah. I think that's maybe the biggest correlation to the quote unquote October lull. When people are like, oh, I'm not seeing anything, they go out and hunt on marginal conditions. They're intrusive. They're checking their cameras, all those different things. And clearly there's an impact. And I think what you described is a perfect illustration of with intrusion, they are going to behave differently. And if there is none, they should hypothetically be easier to kill. And so I think that's really cool. That's that's pretty cool to know that property had that much of an age class built up, and obviously how impactful it is to be in a good neighborhood as well. So that was I'm just so break it down just a little bit further. So I assume your access, was it like, were you deep in the property or was it on the edge of the property?
Yeah, the access was it's on one of the edges. Like it's one of those properties that if you wanted to intrude into the middle parts of the property, you probably could, but you're gonna get blown out. You're gonna get blown out. You're gonna be jumping does, and heck, you might be jumping some bucks on the way in. So this property is kind of set up in a little bit of a U, if you can, like an upside down horseshoe, and we're hunting on the top of that horseshoe. So in that
Okay.
oxbow is all kinds of bedding. Um, there's really no mass bearing trees. There's no oaks. There's no nothing like that on the property. So really, there's really good bedding, food on top of the hill from some farmers, and we're kind of in the middle, right?
Mm,
And the way that we have an it doesn't even have a road to this place. We have an easement getting back to it. So it's nice because these cattle guys have these paths, around every single edge of their property. We drive in, cut the headlights hundreds of yards away, and just sneak up, jump over the fence into our property, and it's 200 yards to the tree stand. So,
mm,
but it's 10 foot tall everywhere in this place. So when you're walking in, like it's kind of creepy because grass is over your head and you're just like slithering through like a snake. And so,
yeah.
but if you take it real slow, you can get in, and it's bulletproof access. I mean, it really is. There's some other stands on the property and the interior that I've never ventured to because it's like if I have bucks of that age class using all these features during daylight hours and I'm getting great pictures of them, there's no reason to push in further in my mind because it's weird to say, but we've hunted the property 3 times. We've killed 3 bucks.
That's crazy. That
Yeah.
is awesome.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. So, yeah, and you continued on with a really great season too. So, walk us through a little bit further throughout the year. I just want to kind of get a general recap of a busy year from you.
Yeah. We the next for us was public land in eastern Oklahoma. Was in the mountains. We were hunting there. And we had an awesome trip there. I hunted I shot a doe with the opening or the first day that we got there. It rained that first morning, so we got into the stand a little bit later early in the evening. It was actually the earliest deer that I ever shot in an evening. It was like 1 o'clock. I shot
Really?
a Yeah, I shot a doe. And that was my first deer with the MMT too, which was pretty awesome. So I shot one there. I'm trying to think what else happened in that season or that trip. Also, probably saw it on one of our videos, but my uncle Justin shot a freak like the
Yeah.
third day when we were there. Mainframe 10 with triple flyers on each side ended up being a 165-inch buck. Just an incredible deer. That was his biggest buck. It was so weird though seeing that deer because the deer probably weighed 120 pounds field dressed. and had a mid 160s rack. Can you imagine seeing that come through the woods?
Like a Texas deer, except in
Yeah,
Oklahoma.
it looked fake. Because when he ended up caping it out and he had just the body laying there, I was like, the doe I shot yesterday is bigger than that. Like this is like this is nuts. But that was really cool. We continued to hunt in that public land piece that we were on, and I think it was day 4 of the trip. I had a really good buck come in behind me, and it sucks because in these in these mountains, like there's no clear bed to food pattern, right? There's oaks and there's good food producing trees all kind of scattered and mixed in. But with the grass being as tall as it is, the bedding can be anywhere, right? You're like walking in a weird place and a deer just jumps up. You're like, that's not a bedding area. This is out in the middle of the open. Like it's just kind of what they do. And the deer are kind of wanderers too. So I was set up on this deep creek system where there was a lot of bedding up on the top of this hill, and I watched a few deer come by me one morning, and then about 9:30, I was about to get down, and I just heard like a deer bounding away. You can tell what that is even on those pine needles. You just hear one bounding away, and at this point, I'm like, the deer's running away. I might as well get a look at what it was. So I turn around and just a beautiful 130-inch eight is running away, like 12-inch twos, 9-inch threes, 4 or 5-inch eye guards, probably 17, 18 inches wide. And I was like, gosh, dang. And that was the only good one I saw the trip. He just came in downwind to me, and he just winded me and ran away. So that was the only good one I saw on that trip. And when you're hunting in these mountainous areas, like you go days sometimes without seeing deer. And so getting one really good opportunity in a week-long period is a success. So
Mhm.
I was like, well, there goes my shot. I just hope Peyton or Jake is having a better time. A day later, Jake had a probably 120s 8 come by him. He had left his release back at the tree or
Oh,
back at the truck and his
no.
binos, and had dropped his platform that morning. So like he said he was still like sweating when he got up in the tree. And not 2 minutes later, here comes a buck bounding by. He said he was just in shambles, just punched the trigger and airmailed the shot on that one, which we've all done at some point, especially in that situation. Peyton actually passed a pretty good public land buck on day 1. He had probably a 120 come in, and he was like, "No, I don't want to shoot that buck." And I was like, "Well, speak for yourself. I would, I mean, I definitely would." So that was the second trip of the year, public land hunting. Peyton, Jake, and I didn't get it done, but Michael Justin was the big winner that weekend with the 165.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes the trip for everyone when that
Oh
happens.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was thinking that same morning, if I would have shot that 130-inch eight, I wouldn't have been disappointed in any way. But Justin was the big winner. No, that was his trip.
Mhm.
So from there, we had a long trip planned, like it was like a 15 or 16-day trip, and we went straight from Oklahoma up to Southeast Kansas. And when we got up there, it was like pandemonium. I think it was like November 6th or 7th when we got up there, and there were so many people. Like we were staying at a Hotel 8, and it was like every truck had Yeti coolers and stuff in the back, and I was like, "Oh, that's how it's gonna be."
Yeah.
So I had got walked up one time in that walked up on by somebody in Oklahoma, and so we didn't see a ton of pressure there. But even though I got walked up on, every time I hunted in Southeast Kansas in the first few days, I got walked up on. There was one, and if it wasn't somebody walking up on me, it was somebody walking up on. I was walking up on someone. The
Mhm.
first day I was sitting all day. It was like 2 o'clock. I had made it that deep into the trip or into the hunt, and one person comes by, and I'm like, "It's fine. I'll just let him keep walking." Like, and it wasn't a hunter either.
Mhm.
And another person comes by half an hour later, and then another person. I was like, "Okay, this something's wrong." I check onX. I'm on one of those dotted hiking trails.
Oh,
The
jeez.
people had started 2.5 miles away and just walked by me, and it was crazy because I had saw 5 or 6 deer that morning,
Mm.
and the hikers came through, messed up there. The next morning, I went in, and it was daylight savings that day, and so we were just late. Like it was terrible how late we were. And I walked in, and I was just huffing and puffing. I got about a mile back in there, and I sat down on the creek bank, and I'll never forget this. But I sat down, and all of a sudden, just from about 30 yards away, I hear a guy say, "Hey, you gonna sit right there?" I was like, "Sorry, dude, I didn't even see you." I was like, "I'll keep moving." He goes, "I think you should," but he said it in like a snarky way,
Mhm.
and so I was like, "I think I might sit right here now since you're gonna be like that."
Yeah. Ah,
Yeah,
jeez.
that was funny. Um, so the trip continued. Um, we went up a little bit further north than we had been hunting, and ended up having some pretty good success. There was still a lot of people around where we were hunting that time too, but sometimes you got to make do with what you have. And so I spent one evening scouting, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to go in and blindly sit in a place that worked in September or that I had seen deer in before. I'm going to go find deer and I'm going to go hunt them. So I drove by a place that I've been hunting and hadn't been seeing any deer, and I saw about 30 or 40 deer on a Milo field. And one of
Mm,
them was probably a 160s, like a mid 60s buck. And obviously it was on private land. But it was right next to a weehaw portion of public. And that next day I went in there and set up on the ground, and I had like two or three does come by at 20 or 25 yards. Of course, they circled downwind of me and busted me. And when I was about to leave, um, a few bucks came walking by down that fence line, and I hit one of them with a snort wheeze. They stopped. They keep going. Another one comes by, hit him with a snort wheeze, same thing. Well, about right at last shooting light, I just see a buck circling me downwind, probably 25 yards away. And I saw that this buck had a pretty decent rack on him. And I was like, you know what? It's day 6 of the trip. I'm on public land. I'm fixing to go home. I would love to shoot a buck in Kansas, especially on the ground. I was just hiding behind a rock on the
it's
ground.
crazy.
It was the only piece of cover, like a rock and a telephone pole. And I was sitting right there. And that buck came downwind to me. I shot him at 25 yards. He wasn't a very big buck after I recovered him, but I was still very, very happy with him. I left out with that buck, and then Peyton ended up shooting probably a 110-inch buck in Kansas the next couple days, and that was our Kansas trip. We had a great season in Kansas. We actually passed some bucks way better than those ones, but
Mhm.
ended up going home with something a little smaller. But it was fun. I enjoyed my time in Kansas.
Are you excited to get back?
Oh, what do you mean with the
It
trail cam ban? Hey, of course not. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. I don't know if we'll do it again this year. We might. I know we're closing in on the deadline to apply to Kansas again, but I'm excited to get back. I might want to try somewhere a little bit further away from where we hunted this last time. And I know that's kind of a blanket thing in Kansas, it seems like these days with so many people hunting it, right? But I think we just might try somewhere a little bit different this next time.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Here's a so how many deer did you shoot with the MMTs this year? It was a lot. I think you have the record for the first year
There
MMT
we go.
launch.
Yeah. So I shot that opening day buck. I didn't have my MTs yet. I shot 5 deer with the MTs. I shot 2 bucks, that buck in Kansas, shot a big 7 in Oklahoma in December, and then 3 does. So I
Mhm.
think I got 5.
Well, I know you did a video on it, but for people listening, what's your feedback or synopsis of using them, and then maybe comparing them to the first buck without the MMT of the year?
Yeah. I was really impressed with them. It had been a long time since I had used an arrow that was not micro diameter, and I don't know why that was. I'd just been shooting the Easton FMJs for a long time and having pretty good success. But one of the issues that I was having with arrows, everybody knows now, arrows are freaking expensive. No matter who you buy arrows from, they just are. And my FMJs, since they had that aluminum coating around them, I was having issues with and we made a joke about it, like they're one use arrows. And for me, I need arrows that aren't one use, right? I can't, not that I can't afford, but I prefer not to break an arrow every single time I shoot an animal, especially if you're going to be shooting 5, 6, 7, 8
Yeah.
deer a year with all the does and stuff. So when I got the MMTs, they shot great through my setup. I shoot a Prime Nexus 4. The tune was great, very accurate. They weren't that far off on sight tapes from my other arrows, so it was super easy to sight them in, and I really enjoyed them. Like the first deer that I switched to a fixed blade broadhead this season, and the first deer that I shot on public land with them, I shot this doe at like 25 yards, and I literally stuck You got first impressions. You only get one first impression, right?
Absolutely.
I went through this doe and I stuck the arrow like in the dirt behind her, and I was like, I liked that. Like that's a really good first impression. And you contrast that to the story that I was telling you earlier with the FMJs. I shot that buck, got very little penetration on a quartering away shot. Shot him a second time, got terrible penetration, and one of those was with a fixed blade broadhead, and one of them was with an expandable. Some of that probably could have been, the angle that I was shooting
Sure.
at. I can't guarantee that that was all the arrow, but man, the FM the FMJs didn't penetrate very well, and the MMTs. I shot 5 deer this last season, 5 passers, and that was a variety of angles, right? Like your classic broadside, your quartering away, or slightly quartering to. I just put them through every ringer that I could, in a variety of distances, and with a good fixed blade broadhead, I was just punching through stuff, and
Feeling confident.
yeah, feeling really confident, and that's you have to feel confident in your setup. And now I've shot them at Total Archery Challenge. I'm down about a dozen of them personally because of some of the stupid videos that we made. But man, you look at some of the slow mo shots that we got from Total Archery Challenge. There's no fishtail. There's no nothing. They're just you get them properly spined and they're flying smooth. So I had a really good experience with them.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. Another question I have is one of your guys' more popular videos or pieces of content that you guys have done is with Charles Beatty, the Prince of Poachers. And
Yep.
for anyone unsure of who that is, do you want to give a quick summary of who that was? And the reason I bring this up is I want the Cliff Notes version of what that was like, because I could see as an avid ethical hunter that it would be
Yeah.
kind of an awkward conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a poacher. So, I mean, I grew up with some around me, so I know kind of their style. But um, no, Charles Beatty is basically he's a Texan, and he was one of the guys that was infamously hunting the King and the Kennedy ranches, so some of the biggest ranches in South Texas. And there was a huge outlaw hunting culture in like the 70s, 80s, 90s. Obviously, it's started in the 1900s, and it's just basically this big vendetta of people that are like, hey, this land wasn't obtained the correct way. And I think that I should have a right to hunt it based on that. Now, I don't agree with that in any way. But Charlie and him and his buddies had ended up shooting like 116 deer off of these ranches over like a 20-year period of time, and some just insane bucks, 180 pluses off of here. Talked about encounters with, 200-inch bucks, and they basically what they were doing, which made it so interesting. I think is somewhat even more interesting than the hunting side of it or the poaching side of it, I should say, is they would spend like up to 20 something days in their backpack hunting. And that was just nuts to me, like near death experiences, people coming at them with choppers, like them almost starving, like just that kind of stuff. It's almost like a dual survival meets like hunting. It's a weird thing, but no, interviewing Charlie is just a completely interesting experience because he is so old time, right? Like you couldn't tell him that what they were doing was wrong. Obviously, he's now came to a faith and does and believes a lot of the stuff he did was wrong, but they have a vendetta against the people that have those ranches in South Texas, and you can feel it in them. And they're just natural born storytellers. I think that's what makes it so interesting. People that listen to it that are hunters, I don't agree with any of it. But here's the thing: one, it already happened, and two, I'm not going to change it. Three, these are going to be a great example of what not to do for people that hunt. And it's a completely different game now. I don't think you could do it now with the
No.
security systems, the cellular cameras. It was just a
Thermal
completely
imaging,
yeah,
everything.
completely different game. And like one of the ways they like to put it is like it's Pat and Charlie, a couple of people we interviewed. It's just the way it was. And I've talked to some people that grew up that way where I live, and that's what they say. It was just the way it was. People just did it. They didn't view it in the same way that we do, which is fine. I don't agree with it, but it is what it is.
How'd you guys get connected with him?
So I had Charlie on the podcast like on episode number like 27, and I would have your grandma on the podcast at that point if she wanted to. Like I was just anybody that wanted to get on or that I could
Yeah.
convince to come on, I would have. And like I think Charlie messaged me one day. It was like, let's do a podcast. And I think he was doing
Whoa.
that to a lot of people at the time. And
Oh, to get
he
his
was
book. He like launched a book around that time, right?
yeah, he had a book and like he was trying to promote the book. And I was like, Sure. Like he sent me a copy of the book. I read the
Hmm.
book and I was like, dude, this does not seem real. This is kind of nuts. And so I had him on the podcast, episode 27, and like a year later, I looked down, it's got 150,000 views. I'm like, what? Are people interested in this kind of stuff? I thought it was just going to be another episode, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, we have on people from hunting other places, different species, African. We have this weird poacher guy come on, and then it ended up being something a lot bigger than that. And we've had him on a few times since then. And but yeah, that's kind of how we got connected.
Hmm. You have to excuse my ignorance on this, but did he end up getting caught, or did he just stop doing it, or what happened there?
Yeah, he did. He did end up getting caught. He got arrested. They actually changed the law a little bit. Like it used to be a misdemeanor. So,
Whoa.
you just look at human behavior, right? If shooting a 200-inch deer is a misdemeanor, you'd have people doing it all the time. And
Hmm.
now it just would be with crossbows or something else, right? Like people
Hmm.
would just be sneaking in places and doing it. Um, so once they turned it to a felony, a lot of those guys quit doing it. I'm sure there's guys that still do, but they just said that it wasn't worth going to prison for a deer. And yeah, I
So did
agree.
he just get a misdemeanor, or did he end up getting
He
a
got a
felony from it?
misdemeanor. Yeah,
That's pretty. Yeah, that's crazy.
it is. It's crazy when you think about it like that, right?
Yeah.
We value wildlife, it seems like, in a completely different way now. And
Yeah.
it probably should have always been a felony. I agree with that. But when it's not, there's
Wasn't
going
as
to be a
big of an
certain,
industry. It wasn't big. There wasn't
no.
as much monetization at the time, which is probably a big part of it. With
Well,
how big of a business it can be by shooting big deer.
that's the thing, right? When a deer is worth nothing, you're going to value it at nothing, like from a monetary perspective. So now when one of those same bucks on a low fence ranch like the King Ranch is worth $20,000, that's a big deal,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, they changed the law and a lot of those guys quit, which thank God. They didn't need to be doing that in the first place.
Yeah, one of those oddball pieces of whitetail history. I think that he deserves a page on there
Yeah.
for being
Yeah,
notorious.
for sure.
So here's a question, because you guys do a lot of short form informative content online on a lot of just different things, shot placement, everything you think of. I feel that you guys have covered somewhat to some extent. What's one thing that you wish more hunters knew or actually took to heart? Could be about anything,
Mm. Oh, I don't want to step on toes here, but
but you
I
can.
think,
This is our
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, that's true. I think one of the things that I wish people would focus on is becoming better at archery instead of like builds, instead of like equipment, instead of heck, to some extent, arrows. Like with you guys, you can outsource all of the science you need about learning about arrows to an arrow building company and then focus on getting better, right? Like a lot of folks, I think there's so much gear in the outdoor industry now, right? It's like, oh, I get this backpack, I'm going to be better, right? If I get this, and in some extent you will be, but you're only as good as your skills. And so one of the things that I've tried to kind of think about and take a step back is like, what can I do from a skill development standpoint where I can get better at shooting a bow or shooting a rifle or whatever to be more effective? No matter what weapon you put in my hand, I'm going to be better with it instead of my gear. I'm a gearhead myself. So I tend to be like, oh, I'm going to get this and this is going to change everything. I'm going to get this new bow sight and it's going to change everything. And it's just simply not that way. I've seen people, one of the stories that I always go back to is my first 3D archery tournament. I went and I was shooting my hunting rig with a 6-inch stabilizer and 2 or 3 pin sight. And there was a guy in like a PSE jersey. He had like a shoot through riser, all his target arrows. Obviously a hinge style release. We go up to the first target. I shoot like an 8 or a 10 on it. And I was like, sweet, I hit the target. Awesome. It was like 25 yards. This guy walks up to the target with all his gear, all his stuff, and he airmails the first shot
Oh,
at
jeez.
25 yards. I was like, dude, you have a $4,000 bow. What is going on? And then I was like, oh, it's not about the stuff. It's about in between your ears.
Mhm.
Right. And a lot of folks, they just want to focus on that. And I've been that person. And I would just focus on skill development, getting better at finding, locating, hunting, becoming a better killer than the gear because people have been killing them with stuff that sucked a heck of a lot worse than what we have now, and they're going to keep doing it. So I
Mhm.
would just focus on that. That would be my one thing.
Yeah, I think that's just inherently in human behavior. The more money you spend on something, the better you think you're going to be. And I mean, whether it's right or wrong, I just think that's transcendent across every industry, every hobby, and everything. But to your point, that's an excellent piece of advice that I think everyone can get better at. And I think that is a really good example. I know of some hunters that you could give them the worst gear ever, and they're going to out hunt me every season.
Oh yeah, Well, there's some
And give
videos.
me the blank check to pick whatever I want. They're gonna be better because they're better at more things.
That's right. There's another video that I think about too is this company that when I started doing video a little bit better or a little bit more, I bought this course called Full Time Filmmaker, and they have a video of um, like a young guy that's not professional at all. He's his first day videoing. They give him a $50,000 red cinema camera, and they give a professional an iPhone, and they let them do the videos. And if you watch the videos, you'd be like, "Oh, the iPhone video is way better," and the guy's a $50,000 camera. So that's just another illustration of
Yes.
it. It doesn't matter. I think there are some things that can help you be better. Like cell cameras are definitely one of those for me. I'm private. Like I
Mhm.
don't have to go in and intrude. I think that's one of the reasons that we kill older age class deer. I really do.
Mhm.
Um, but in most cases, it's a no.
Mhm. Here's another question too, because when I was watching some of your guys' video, and to your point, it seemed that there wasn't a ton of cover on some of those parts of Oklahoma that you're hunting. So when you're hunting those areas, how are you keying in on potential areas that are worthwhile to hunt when it all kind of looks the same? And maybe I'm pigeonholing that. I'm just basing this off of the video.
Yeah, man. I'm trying to think of some of the stuff in Oklahoma that we do. Cover a lot of the stuff that we hunt has limited cover in the sense like it's not real thick cover, but it's everywhere, right? And so the ways that we try to narrow it down are where are those X marks to the spots that have all the things that we want coming together in one place. Is like a lot of folks in those big woods or a lot of timber environments with not a lot of cover, they hunt edges, right? And we've had a lot of success hunting edges, but some of the stuff we've had even more success with is where is there a place that has cover but also has oaks or also has um briars, like thicker stuff that we're trying to get while we're getting to the stand. It's going to not only eliminate people that are going to want to come through that spot, but also stuff that is makes the deer feel more comfortable. One of my favorite spots that I hunt, I call the community center. I shot that 131-inch 8, and then next year I went back and shot 120-inch 8 out of the same tree on public land. And one of the reasons for that is when you walk in, there's not a lot of dense cover, but it's like briars and thick stuff on the ground. It's hard to navigate when you got stuff hanging off you. But when you get up in the tree, it looks completely different. When you get above the cover, you can kind of see everything. But when you're on the ground, it's not that way. And that's kind of the stuff that we look for. Where are those? Where is cover? Where is food? Where is water? Kind of all converging in one little spot. And that's where we typically set up shop because you can find, if you look on the map from a mapping perspective, all the places look pretty much the same. And you go in, you go into one place, it might only have cover, no food. No, X that off. Go into another place, it might only have food, no cover. X that off. It's the place where all those things come together that we like to spend a lot of our time. And that's been very fruitful for us. We've killed several really good public land bucks doing just that.
Mhm.
But more and more, we're looking for those places that do have really good security cover just for looking for bucks that have maturity. So that's worked for us in the past, but I think this year we're going to hone in a little bit more on places that have better cover.
Okay. And this is something that I picked up on what you guys do during the summer. You have like weekend scouting trips. You go out and you just put on a pile of miles and hang out cameras. Is that paramount to your guys' success, do you think?
On
If I
public land?
Yeah, if I
Yes.
said you couldn't do that anymore, would you think it would be a different story at the end of the season?
I think we'd still kill deer, but not the deer that we want to kill. And it'd be kind of like a rolling a dice, right? One of the things that we really like to do, I think what you're alluding to is a lot of these properties, the biologists will keep the edges of the property in roads, right? Not big roads, just 2-track roads. And one of the things that you can exploit with that is hanging cameras on the perimeters of these places. Because in the summer, these bucks are going to walk down those roads. They're not going to walk through the cover. They're going to walk towards the roads because there's no pressure. There's nothing. There's no reason not to. So what we do is we'll go along. Let's say there's 1,000-yard stretch of road on the perimeter of one of these public pieces. We would go every 250 yards, camera, 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 camera. So 4 cameras, and we'd split that up. What that does is you're not going to get the same deer on every one of those cameras, but it's this way to cast a really wide net and just understand what kind of deer are using that area. And we'll go in and say, like, say there's no buck that we want to chase in that area. That's fine. We'll take those cameras, shift them to another area. And it's not giving us really specific information like, hey, they're using this ridge system or this bedding area. It's not giving us anything like that. All it's doing us is saying, all it's doing is telling us, hey, in this general area, there's a buck that you want to chase. Now go be a woodsman and find out what kind of terrain features and stuff he's going to use within that area. Because in reality, even if we found them on a certain system, they might be in a different one in the fall, right? So we're just using that as a wide net to
qualify area
to qualify. Yeah. And you can cut out these big chunks like, hey, in a 2-month period of time, we didn't get a picture of any deer walking that road that we wanted to go after. And another scenario is like when Jake shot that 162, we were doing that. And we said, okay, this is the only deer that we care about killing. Let's take all of our cameras and find that deer now. And so we scoured that area and found exactly which ridge systems he was using, which bedding areas he was using, what wind directions, all that stuff. And he ended up shooting that deer because of that. And that's all because we got one random picture of that deer on a road.
That's cool. That's amazing when all that comes together and that you're able to really formulate a plan that's executed successfully on a specific deer. That's really cool. So it sounds like cameras are also extremely important to this type of strategy. I mean, what if Oklahoma bans trail cameras on public land? Then what?
God. We're going to use our decade of experience that we have in these areas. Go back. I mean, I'm okay with like going and scouting and being a woodsman and hunting over sign. The issue with hunting over sign and stuff is you just don't know what specific deer you're going after, right? Like we might hunt a spot and the biggest deer in there might be 110 incher, and that's fine. Just on public land, I want to shoot a Pope and Young. I want to be hunting a Pope and Young. So I think it would just make you a little bit less successful in terms of finding deer of a certain caliber, but you might also wander into one of them that's just an absolute giant that you never knew was there too. But if you had a gun to my head and say cameras or no cameras, I'm going with cameras. I just like I love having that recent information and just being able to say like, it's so much easier to get up early to sit in your tree stand when your background is a big old buck and you're like, I am killing you. This is your last day alive. I'm going to find you.
Yeah. I like that. Okay. So I've talked to a ton of people, and Oklahoma is a state that keeps getting brought up more and more in conversation. Obviously, you're from there originally. Have you seen Oklahoma change at all in the last 2 or 3 years? And do you anticipate any change as it gets more popular? I mean, it's inevitable at this point.
I wouldn't recommend hunting Oklahoma. No, I'm just kidding. I have to say that. No, Oklahoma has changed in the sense of the amount of people you see on public land. The good thing is a lot of the areas that we hunt have a lot of acreage. So you can kind of disperse some of that pressure across the properties. We haven't had a ton of issues with people walking up on us, and it inevitably happens hunting public land. But man, the state just keeps producing really, really big deer. And it's not in a certain area of the state, right? The southeast, the northeast, southwest, northwest. There's big deer that come out of every single one of those areas. And I think Oklahoma will continue to be more popular, getting more popular. And one of the reasons for that is just it's an over-the-counter state still, right? Like you go in with archery equipment, for like $290, you get 2 buck tags, 4 doe tags. Tell me another state that has the caliber of deer that we have at that price point. There's not many.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a state that you can run trail cams in, right? Like you could say Missouri, but you can't run trail cameras, right? So that's kind of one of the things. I think all of the opportunity is there in its current state for harvesting big bucks, and none of the downsides as far as costs go. It's in a good location. A lot of states can get to it very quickly. If you're in the Midwest, it's not that far. If you're in the South, it's not that far. There's a lot of great things happening in the state. And I think, for the next 5 years, you'll continue to see really big deer killed on public land, on private land. There is some issues with like leases now. It's very, very hard to find a lease. If you don't know somebody, you're not getting a lease unless your pockets are big. And I don't think that's unique to Oklahoma, right? As soon as you find a big buck state, people with more money are coming in and they're buying up those leases. And that's okay. I mean, that's just for me, it's another reason to have really good relationships with people and just try to continue and nurture those. I mean, the leases that I have are a result of just really good friendships, and they're not an arm and a leg. So I think it just makes it that much more important in today's day and age. And Oklahoma's a killer state. I really hope that I know the big game biologists in Oklahoma, and I've actually had them on the podcast several times. But I have faith and I have hope, maybe not faith, but I have hope that if it changes and the $2 limit is not sustainable for the state and for non-residents and stuff, that they'll make a change. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that's out of our control. I mean, I feel like you
Yeah.
just have to ride the wave and enjoy it while you can. Is really what that basis is. But do you think Oklahoma is properly rated, underrated, or overrated right now?
It's probably properly rated. I think a few years ago it would have been underrated. I think 5 years ago, you say Oklahoma, people aren't going to go, oh yeah, Giants, But
now people are like Oklahoma. I mean, it comes up in conversation all the time now.
Well, you see people that are doing really, really well with content hunting there. You see Dudley hunting there. You see the Untamed. There's a lot. Chris B. There's a lot of folks that have leases now in Oklahoma. And yeah, it's getting extremely popular. And I think it's very properly rated right now. If the population takes a tank and the quality of bucks and the age class goes down, it'll definitely be overrated. But right now, I think it's properly rated.
What's the impact of feral pigs in Oklahoma on whitetails?
I don't know. I've seen them do really well in tandem together. So a lot of the stuff that we hunt in eastern Oklahoma, you'll see pigs. Like if you hunt a week long, you're inevitably one pack of 20, 25 pigs is coming by. And if they come by me, it's going to be one less every time. I mean, the buck I shot in 2021, I shot a pig squeals, runs 30 yards, kicks over, all of them run off. 30 minutes later, I shoot the buck.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was really cool. There's other places like in northern Oklahoma that we have hunted that it seems like the deer don't like to live as in that, but that's more flat, more ag country, and they do not live in tandem together there. I don't know why that is, but I don't think there's a huge impact on the deer population. I think where it becomes more of a problem is the turkey and the nesting habitat. And obviously pigs are disgusting. They'll eat anything. They'll eat each other. Like they're just feral, nasty animals that breed too many times during a year. So I don't see it having a negative impact on the deer hunting, but I know a lot of people shoot them because of the turkeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think they'll continue to spread out across the country and move north and everywhere else. But okay,
nuts.
Anything else that you want to share here that we didn't cover?
I'm ready for this fall. I'm ready to shoot some more big bucks. That's all I want to cover. I mean, we're so close to getting to the season where trail cams are going to be out and velvet is going to be sprouting.
Oh yeah.
I cannot quit thinking about that. Now that we're past Total Archery Challenge for us in Oklahoma, and it's actually hot now. So I'm ready to, if it's going to be hot, I'm at least ready to see some velvet pigs. So no, that's all I would say was I'm ready for deer season already.
I'll put you in the spot here. If you had to suggest one video or one podcast episode for people to go listen on your guys' platform, which one are you going to send them to?
We had a really good conversation with John Eberhardt recently.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. I know he does a ton of podcasts, but we talked to him about, hunting pressured bucks on public land, which obviously is right in his wheelhouse. But I just thought it was a really good conversation. We talked for over 2 hours, even though we only booked him for an hour. But I promise you, John probably could have talked for a dozen hours if you let him.
He loves it.
Yeah, so I know you guys have a lot of pods with him too. So, but we really enjoyed that episode. That's probably the one I would say.
Okay. Well, I encourage people to go listen to that one. And also, where can people find you? I know you guys are putting out a lot of content on a lot of different platforms, but go ahead and plug that. And I want to thank you for your time. And I'm excited to follow where those MMTs land this fall too, and what velvet bucks you get on camera.
Yeah, for sure. No, you can find us. We're most active. We're pretty active on most platforms. YouTube is just Hunter's Advantage. We have a couple channels on there, Hunter's Advantage and then Hunter's Advantage Podcast. Those are two separate channels. On most socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, it's just Hunter's Advantage or Hunter's_Advantage, one of those two. But that's where you can find us. We're always posting. We have a podcast. Wherever you listen to podcasts, just look up Hunter's Advantage Podcast. You'll see a ugly picture of me holding the nice buck, but focus on the buck, not on me. And that's where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christian.